Hi there, and let's chat about the movement of Lilith this week. Also, a little bit about Chiron, which are two of our shadow placements representing Chiron, our childhood wounds that we have created patterns around. So, childhood wounds between the ages of 3 and 23. And also, our Lilith placement representing our places we felt guilt, shame, or misunderstood, our kind of dark unquietable desires and natures. So if you need more information on what Lilith represents, I do have a couple of other videos if you want to go and check those out. So today we will be looking at what Lilith is up to this week and what she is helping us work on. So Lilith is in Leo currently, so we have been working on our ego wounds and our self-confidence. So where we may have felt shamed, guilty, or misunderstood in those places, generally in ways that we have repressed our projections, I guess, of being confident, and through that creating a, deep kind of darkness wound around whether or not we are allowed to be proud of ourselves and project who we are into the world. So when we look at Lilith, she does bring out the worst in the sign. So looking at Leo, she can bring out really negative projections of overconfidence, really negative projections of our ego, and we can find ourselves very run by ego when Lilith is working with us. And the reason for that is something that we also need to understand is it's just a projection of that insecurity and of programming that we have created around that aspect. So learning to dig into that shadow and work with those negative traits that we have developed from these places of shame and guilt and misunderstanding is how we heal those wounds. So we are wrapping up Lilith in Virgo, Lilith in Leo, and she will be moving to Virgo from October 3rd until July next year, which is when we will start looking at how we may have underestimated our abilities, how we don't believe in what we can do or what we have to offer. And it deals with places that we might have been shamed as a child if we didn't align with the expectations of the environment that we were in, perhaps if we had very strict parents. It also suggests that people, if you do have a Lilith in Virgo placement in your chart, you may have been someone that came from a family that really had one ideal of how to live and that anything else wasn't acceptable. And because of that, we develop these, I guess, reactionary responses from ego a lot of the time in how we project that. So, we tend to look for flaws in other people, we openly criticize other people. And, these things are because we do that with ourselves, because we are criticizing our own abilities and we don't believe in our own abilities. And we like to have things a certain way because that's how we were programmed in our younger years, or how you are still being kind of programmed now if you've just started working with your Lilith placements. So one of the ways that Lilith in Virgo is going to show us is how to be present so that we aren't thinking too far ahead and assuming that we've failed. So being present and understanding what is important, and not repressing things. So when Lilith is in Virgo, which will be from the 3rd of October, it is very important to have a good awareness of your emotional and spiritual health, because it is a placement that we do struggle to be vulnerable with. So looking at Lilith in Leo still for another, oh my gosh, we're almost there, a couple of weeks, less than. So we had an aspect with Lilith this morning, Monday, the 25th of September, while the moon was void. And so we had a quincunx with the moon in Capricorn. And so we were looking at our ego wounds and our self-confidence wounds around how we may have been misunderstood or guilted for being confident, for projecting ego. And in relation to how we do those things in a negative way. And so the moon in Capricorn was asking us to kind of accept the emotional lessons that we had last week from Lilith, which was trying to understand where we played a part, where we had choices, different choices that we could have made in how we negatively projected ego and self-confidence in ways that made us egotistical, in ways where we looked at manipulation in order to get our way. And in order to accept these emotional lessons, Mr. Capricorn Moon asks us to kind of compromise with ourselves, because some of the ideals are quite difficult to grasp. And so Capricorn wants us to be mature about the way that we look at it. And so perhaps just finding one or two ways that you can see through a compromise in how you were acting. You know, oh, I acted like this, maybe next time I'll try acting like that, and compromising with yourself as a way to work with the emotional lesson. So on Wednesday, the 27th of September, again during the next void moon, there is a sextile to Neptune and then an opposition from the moon in Aquarius. So we'll be in a really spiritual headspace. We'll have woken up in a spiritual headspace because of that sextile to Neptune. And we will be like in an increased awareness of our spirituality. So when Lilith makes that opposition with the moon in Aquarius, it will be very much about our individual intuition, and we will be looking at these places of shame and misunderstandings from ego wounding in relation to feeling emotionally inhibited and fearing like wild emotion. Because as we start looking at how we project ego in negative ways, one of the ways that it does come out is when we are threatened and we are triggered to emotional extremes. And so as we start understanding these things, it develops kind of a bit of a fear of being put in a position to go to that emotional extreme, because as we take the emotional responsibility from understanding that we played a part in that, and that all of the external blame that we put out onto somebody else was actually somewhat ourselves, understanding that nobody makes us feel or act a certain way. That is a choice that we make a lot of the time, and if it is not something that you feel like is a choice, then you need to work with your own reactionary triggers and understand where they come from. And so once you start doing that, and you start understanding your own emotional responsibility in regards to how your projection of ego onto other people and the way that it projects specifically from you affects other people, you start to find that you fear situations where you think you might get pushed into that, because you understand on some level that you do not want to act like that, and yet you are not quite ready and have not quite consolidated the lessons, and so you know you are at risk of being pushed back into that bad behavior. So that opposition on Wednesday with the moon in Aquarius is going to be bringing up that energy, is going to be putting us into a place of not wanting to be pushed into an emotional extreme, because we understand we do not have full control over our ego reactions, okay? So then on Friday, we have an aspect, a quincunx, with the moon in Pisces. So when the moon is quincunxing Lilith in Pisces, it's asking us if the emotional reaction that we are having, so the one that we had realized and started to fear, if that emotional reaction is also ego. And it really wants us to dig in and look at if we used that emotional reaction to manipulate the situation. So this is thinking of times when you were triggered. So you are feeling insecure about how you are not feeling confident, okay? So really a wounding of self-confidence. You may have been shamed for being too confident. And so you are projecting this in a way that is asking for sympathy and empathy because you are feeling emotional. So this is like when you perhaps have done the wrong thing and you exhibit the emotional overreaction of crying of asking for sympathy and empathy, but that emotion is not a true emotion. It is one that you are using to manipulate a situation. And so this is where that fear of being put into that wild emotional situation comes from, when we don't understand these things and we don't understand that that reaction that we have had is purely to manipulate a situation. And that is an ego response to protect us from being seen as the problem, when sometimes we are indeed the problem. And so when the moon in Pisces quincunxes Lilith on Friday, it's really asking us to have a hard look at ourselves and our emotional reactions in relation to when we are triggered by others and called out for our egotistical behavior, is when this sort of thing shows up. So when someone makes us feel like we have responded negatively and egotistically and overly confident, and we have used those things to make somebody else feel bad about themselves, and then we get called out on that and we go into an emotional extreme of manipulating our emotions for someone to feel empathy for us so that we don't need to look at how we may have been the problem. So that is a Friday morning, really asking us to delve into that dark side of how we could be using extreme emotional reactions to manipulate a situation that protects our ego, that causes us to not have to take any emotional responsibility for the way that we acted, okay? Not a very light Friday morning on the Lilith there, okay? Then we get to Sunday and we see the Aries moon now making a trine to Lilith in Leo at 11:49 a.m. So this aspect is a much happier aspect, and it is because we have realized how we've used that emotional manipulation to protect our ego. And this trine is really about forgiving yourself because you now understand it. And we only know what we only know, and we don't know it until we learn it. Okay, and so Aries is I am energy, and it is very confident energy, and it is very fiery energy. And we can use this in a trine to Lilith to sort of embrace that new understanding that we have of our projection of ego. And we can be confident in our ego, because once you understand how the dark side of your ego projects and you gain control over that, you can use ego for what we actually need it for, and that is being supportive in how we see ourselves and in our confidence and how we can take action on things. And Aries is a great moon to be standing in that energy. So we will be seeing like ways that we can embrace our taboo sides, ways that we can embrace cosmic insight and our self-intuition in regards to understanding why we project the way that we do when our self-confidence and ego are triggered, and giving us confidence knowing that we can move forward in a different way, and we can start to learn how it presents, and we can start to see how it is projecting when it's in a negative way, when we are using it to put others down instead of looking at our own woundings. Just being careful with this positive aspect, because the moon is in Aries and is quite fiery. If you are trying to not deal with this wound, it becomes evident in being led astray by libido and sexual energy. So there's a lot of that sort of energy around that from Friday until Sunday, where we will be kind of at risk of making really hasty decisions when it comes to building spicy connections. And if you haven't done any work, or whoever's people around you as well, remember also going through this energy, so be aware of that if you are making new connections with people, that there is going to be an energy of spicy distraction. So being led astray by libido, being led astray by spicy thoughts, and wanting to fill that place in us where we are now really deeply looking into our ego and how it projects, and kind of wanting to move away from that if you haven't enjoyed working on it. It's a very hard shadow to work on. That just be careful that you're not falling into spicy connections with the wrong thoughts in mind, okay? So we will be wrapping up Lilith in Leo by the 3rd of October. So we are at the harder end of the lessons, and we are starting to try and alchemize these lessons into who we are as people. So if you need any more direct advice, you can find me at the explicit empress.space. I'll put the details down in the show notes, and we can look at your own Lilith placement, and we can look at how that is projecting for you, because each of us are going to be a little bit different depending on the rest of our charts. But stay true to yourself. Don't be afraid to go into the shadows, and your weirdness is what makes you who you are. You just need to be in control of ego and not allow ego to control you. And that way, Lilith will not project the darkest, worst parts of our shadow once we can control them. So until next time, do your journaling, walk into those shadows and heal. And as always, stay weird.